Independence Cake by Deborah Hopkinson and Giselle Potter. We all know the first rule of cooking: wash your hands. So let me come clean from the start. This is a made-up tale. For while there really was an Amelia Simmons, who wrote America's first cookbook, we don't know much about her. Her cookbook tells us that she lived during revolutionary times and called herself an American orphan. But the details of her life are lost, simmered away in the pot of time. So why not start from scratch and whip up something delicious about her? Let us imagine Amelia Simmons' father was a soldier, lost in the war for independence. Soon his poor widow would follow, succumbing to smallpox and leaving our poor girl alone in the world. The leading town ladies asked, "What shall we do with Amelia?" The answer was clear to all: she must go to Mrs. Bean. Amelia would become a bound girl, taken in by a family to help with chores, so the town would be spared the cost of keeping her. And Mrs. Bean needed help. She had 6 strapping sons, but no daughter of her own. Definitely a recipe for domestic disaster in 1789. "Hello, Mrs. Bean," Amelia called into the kitchen when she arrived. Then she spied a hand waving weakly under stacks of shirts, piles of plates, and mountains of mending. "Don't despair, Mrs. Bean, I'm here." Amelia was as strong and young as the new nation itself. From that day on, she cleaned clothes, scrubbed pots, picked apples, fed the chickens, and gathered the eggs. She learned to spin, and knit, and sew, quilt, and weave, and hoe. Each evening, Amelia brought Mrs. Bean a cup of tea and a thick slice of honey cake. Mrs. Bean sighed with contentment, resting her feet for what seemed like the first time in years. "Thank you, my dear," she said. "You've brightened our lives like a star on the flag." "Amelia," said Mrs. Bean one day, "you've always done everything I've asked, and even learned to read by helping little Billy with his letters. Is there any service I can do for you?" Amelia had a ready answer. "Well, all your cookbooks are from England, but we are independent now. I want to learn good plain American cookery and share recipes with my fellow citizens." Chores and cooking too? For Mrs. Bean, that was the icing on the cake. Soon Amelia was up to her elbows in flour. She learned to boil, broil, bake, and braise. Tarts, creams, and custards. She took charge like General Washington himself. First, Amelia learned to cook the best English dishes. She turned out rice puddings, bread puddings, lemon, plum, and quince puddings. She preserved peaches, pickled cucumbers, and made marvelous marmalades. Then, once she'd mastered the old favorites, Amelia came up with new spice recipes using American ingredients. There was winter squash pudding, perfect on an autumn day. And she used cornmeal to make scrumptious flapjacks with maple syrup. The Bean Boys demolished stacks of them. Just like her times, Amelia was revolutionary. She invented a new way of baking, using potash to help her cakes rise. And what delicious cakes they were. Whenever she went to town, Mrs. Bean bragged about Amelia, boasting of her cakes and how the Bean Boys loved them. So it's no surprise that one morning, a delegation of leading town ladies arrived. Amelia served tea biscuits with strawberry preserves. For a long time, there was only chewing and smiling. Then the first town lady cleared her throat. "As you know, our nation has just elected General Washington our president." "Long live George Washington!" everyone bellowed. Everyone, that is, except for the Bean Boys, who had sneaked in for biscuits and whose mouths were full. "Our new president will soon be inaugurated in New York City," she went on. "To mark this momentous occasion, people from all over are sending gifts to be displayed in Federal Hall." The first town lady stopped to lick her finger, so the second town lady put in, "Amelia, we'd be proud if you would agree to bake a cake in his honor." Amelia clapped her hands. "I know just the thing, an independence cake. Though to feed all those guests, we'll need more than one." Amelia got busy. She used, among other things, 20 pounds of flour, 15 of sugar, and 10 of butter, 4 dozen eggs, beaten well of course, a quart of brandy, spices, currants, and raisins, and lots of yeast to be sure the cakes would rise to this auspicious occasion. Amelia's independence cakes were baked to perfection. Then, together with the boys, she frosted them with sugar and dressed them with gold leaf till they shone like her hopes for the land she loved. "How many do we have?" our plucky patriot asked when they were done.
13,
said little Billy Bean.
"One for each colony."
"Let's name them together, boys," she said. "In alphabetical order, if you please. Connecticut, Delaware, Georgia, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Carolina, and of course Virginia." Mr. Bean hitched up the horses and everyone piled in with all the cakes. Then off they went, unfurling flags and singing songs. The leading town ladies and the leading town men followed in a patriotic procession all the way to Federal Hall. There, Amelia Simmons, soon to be authoress of American Cookery, the first American cookbook, presented a slice of Independence cake to George Washington, the first American president. He proclaimed it delicious. Amelia's recipe for Independence cake: 20-pound flour, 15-pound sugar, 10-pound butter, 4 dozen eggs, 1 quart wine, 1 quart brandy, 1 ounce nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves, mace of each 3 ounces, 2-pound citron, currants and raisins 5-pound each, 1 quart yeast. When baked, frost with loaf sugar, dressed with gold leaf. Author's note: Amelia Simmons was indeed a real person, but just as the story says, little is known about her. We do know that her book, American Cookery, published in 1796, was the first cookbook written by an American. Since Amelia identifies herself as an American orphan, historians believe that she may have had to make her way in the world as a servant or cook. Amelia's cookbook was based primarily on English culinary tradition, but it also featured new dishes that make use of ingredients more common in America, such as cornmeal. In addition, her cookbook was the first to recommend using potash, sometimes called pearl ash, which is similar to the baking powder we use today. Amelia also introduced new words such as cookies, based on the word koekje, borrowed from Dutch settlers in America. The second edition of Amelia's cookbook, also published in 1796, contains the first known recipe for Independence cake. It is similar to recipes for Election Day cakes, which were baked for festive occasions or town meetings in both England and in America. Certainly, in the early days of America, Election Day was a time to come together to celebrate our democracy. But what better way to celebrate than to eat some delicious cake? George Washington was inaugurated the nation's first president at Federal Hall in New York City on April 30th, 1789. There is no record that he ate Independence cake on that day.